Joining me on the channel today is Rita Woods, debut author of Remembrance, out now from Tor Forge. It's a historical fiction novel that braids together the lives of four women separated by more than 2 centuries, but connected by their shared supernatural abilities. Dr. Woods is also a family doctor, director of a wellness center, and serves on the board of trustees at the Homer Glen Library in suburban Chicago. Welcome, Rita.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I always like to start at the beginning. What kind of kid were you?
Oh man, I was so weird. I was very shy, extremely shy. All I wanted to do was read, stay in my room. I didn't like to socialize. Um, and I also was obsessed with death.
Mm.
So my best friend when I was like 6 or 7 was like 60. And we hung out together, we did things together, we made cookies together, and that's the only person I wanted to hang out with. And then she died, and then for like 6 months I was convinced that I shouldn't shower, I shouldn't go to school, I shouldn't get out of bed, because I was going to die too. Not like I was scared of dying, just like, well, what's the point of going to school or ever showering, because you're going to die. So I was a little bit of a morbid, strange kid.
I see that in your book because the main character, Gail, has that really intense relationship with the 100-year-old woman in the
Hmm.
first chapter. So I'm sure that's kind of inspired by your life.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had sort of been drawn to older people. Um, it's so odd. You kind of look in their faces, and I always have this sense of trying to see the younger person that they were, and the shadow of the life that they lived
Mhm.
in the old person that they are. I think because a lot of people tend to dismiss old people as, oh, they're so cute, or they're just kind of invisible. And I
Mhm.
just always found them really fascinating. Their stories and sort of the worlds they could weave, and their histories that are in their faces and their past.
So many interesting things in your book, and that relationship between the older woman and the younger woman is fantastic. And so what sort of books were you interested in when you were growing up?
I really liked adventure books. I had just tweeted a few minutes ago that I loved Little Women, and even though that wasn't my personality, I identified with Jo, this kind of badass girl who defied convention, which wasn't me at all, but that was my heroine. I must have had every Nancy Drew book ever written. I knew I was going to grow up and I was going to have that roadster. I didn't know what a roadster was, but it sounded super cool. Um, and then I read, these, heart-wrenching romance like Jane Eyre and Rebecca
Mhm.
and Marjorie Morningstar. These really old books about female heroines. So those are the kind of books I was drawn to.
Awesome. And so what was your path to wanting to become a writer and getting published?
I always wanted to be a writer. I Again, kind of an odd juxtaposition for a shy kid. I wanted to be a photojournalist, and I wanted to travel to like really exotic places. I somehow I envisioned that I would be dropped into war zones, and I would write these amazing, missives back home, and I would be this really glamorous person. And I did write, sort of all through my childhood, all through high school, college. But I grew up in a professional family. Both my parents were educators, and they very much have this kind of idea that the arts were that's interesting, but it's not a real job. And so I was really smart. I was top of my class. I was a smart kid.
Mhm.
And so the expectation was you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, an architect, and then you can write in your spare time. So I was kind of a people pleasing kid. I didn't have that defiance. I wasn't Joe, so I
Mhm.
couldn't defy the convention. And So I would write little short stories. They would get published. I'd write things in college. They got published, but I was on that track to become a doctor because that was what was expected of me.
Oh, I was doing some research prior to this interview, and I saw, like a lot of historical fiction writers, in fact, the other person who I talked to this weekend, who's a historical fiction writer, had a really long, winding path to getting published. Um, like, historical fiction is a really difficult genre to sell, and
Mhm.
so your path took a long time as well.
It did. It did. I think it was only after. So the odd thing is for, as you can imagine. So going to medical school was a little bit challenging, and then doing a residency was challenging. And so when you're working 100 hours a week, and then I had small kids, I didn't really have the brain space to continue to write. And it wasn't until I was at a meeting. I actually, at one point, was doing a lot of lobbying on Capitol Hill for healthcare. And I ran into somebody in Washington, D.C., and it used to be that no matter who I ran into, when they would see me, their greeting would always be, "What are you writing?" And I ran into someone from that other life, and they said, "What are you writing?" And it was like a dagger in my heart because I hadn't written anything in years. And at that point, I started writing again. And that's kind of how I got back on the path, because I definitely deviated from the path for a
Can you tell us about what was it like the day that you found out that your book was going to be published?
while. So I had gotten an agent at a pitch fest in the Midwest Writers Conference years ago. I don't know if you know that, but Veronica Roth and I have the same agent. We got this
Mhm.
agent at the same time, but
Oh, wow.
my book, for whatever reason, just didn't sell. And sort of to your point,
Yes.
there it kept getting close, and when it would get to acquisitions and marketing, they would say, "Well, we don't know what it is. Is it fantasy? Is it women's fiction? Is it history?" And if marketing can't figure out where to put it on the shelf, they won't buy it.
Mhm.
So it had sort of, my agent, without my knowing it, my agent had continued to sort of knock on those doors. So every 6 months or so, I would talk to Joe. Just, how are you doing? What are you working on now? And she had just had a baby, and she called and said, "Oh, aren't you excited?" And I hadn't spoken to her since she'd had her baby. I was like, "Oh, I'm so excited for you. Congratulations." She's like, "I don't care about the baby. I'm talking about, we sold your book."
Oh my God.
It's like, what? What are we talking? What are we talking about? know, so I was actually in my car and had to pull over because I didn't even know she was still putting it on submission. So I thought we were talking about her newborn when she called to say congratulations.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
So it was really funny. She's like, "I
Like,
don't care about the baby."
like you didn't even know. And that is like, so I write historical fiction and my debut comes out next year. And I reached out to you and I reached out to a couple other historical fiction writers to talk to you this weekend because I want to boost historical fiction. And literally every single historical fiction writer has this story of it literally taking years and
Yep.
years on sub until
Yep.
they finally get the right combination of the editor and the house and the on board. And I mean, that's something that we've all like, you get so close, people love it. You get so close,
Right.
but then marketing and acquisitions, they're like, historical fiction's a tough sell.
Right.
Um, so good on your agent. Your agent is amazing for sticking
She
with
is.
it
She
for so
actually
long.
is. She
Yeah.
actually is.
And what's a misconception that you had about publishing prior to becoming a debut author?
Oh, almost everything is different. And don't get me wrong, I love it. I'm so excited about it. But the work that comes afterwards is just brutal. So after it was acquired and we had a publication date, I don't know if you've been through this yet, where you have the line edits.
I haven't done
Um,
copy edits yet. I just
oh, Carly, at one point I called my agent. I said, "I'm sending my advance back. I'm burning this thing in the backyard. I'm out. I don't know why I ever thought this was a good idea. I was losing my mind, because and my editor would say things like, "Well, you said there was a yellow bush blooming on the banks of the Mississippi in October in Ohio, but in October, yellow flowers aren't really goldenrod. So you might want to come." Like, I don't care. It's a yellow flower. But they were, they were that, the minutia was that much. And when you're talking, and historical fiction tends to be long.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about a 300-page book and they're asking you, does this the street really run north and south in New Orleans or east and west? And I don't think it had the avenue at that point. It was still a street. Oh my God. So that was an adventure.
Oh, wow.
I was like,
I'm looking forward to it.
I was homicidal.
Oh my gosh.
I was truly homicidal. And then after that, there's this whole thing, which I now realize is standard in the industry. You get all these essays that you're expected to write, dozens and dozens of them. And I'm a fiction writer. I'm not an essayist, so it's a different mindset. And so they would call, your editor and agent call and say, well, here's 4 or 5 essays that they want you to write about, for instance, the intersectionality of Afrofuturism and feminism.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
They had me write one. It was so far. So
Just be
look
prepared.
forward to other things that might come my way. And I'm kind of a nerd though. I kind of like
Oh, okay.
like that sort of thing. So I might be okay there.
Okay, so
That
that's
sounds
your
fun.
wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And then do you know about the lists? I didn't know about the lists until the book published. And I had to develop a psychic defense mechanism against it because I didn't know it existed. And then once I realized it existed, it can really kind of suck you in to this very strange place that's not creative and for me wasn't really productive.
Mhm.
So so that was another one of those.
The list as in like the New York Times bestseller list or
Well, there's all of these lists that come
yeah.
out. So your book comes
Like
out in 20.
the 25 best,
Yes.
historical fiction novels of 2020. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh
Yes.
gosh. Yeah, I can totally see myself like keeping track of every one and seeing if I hit it. So yeah, I need to.
And it makes you crazy a little bit.
Yeah.
Even though intellectually this is not what this is about.
Mhm.
It's very easy to get caught up in the sort of the whirlpool of it, and you have to find a way to deal with it. I mean, for some people it's like, oh yeah, this is really affirming. For me, being a little bit of anal and a little bit type A, it just made me nuts. So I just stopped even. First of all, I was like, I didn't know these existed 3 months ago, so why am I getting crazy about them? I'm just going to go back to my happy place. So
Exactly. And when you think about what makes people buy books, it's usually like your friends saying like, I love this book. And by the way, your cover is like the most beautiful cover I've
isn't
ever
it?
seen.
I love it.
I bet you got that in your email and you're like, this is amazing. This is probably like one of my favorite covers of the year, I would say.
I actually was afraid to open it because do you already have your cover or you're in that stage
I
right
haven't
now?
gotten anything as far as that goes.
So I have had the most wonderful experience with that. When I listen to other authors, the experience with publication, I'm so grateful to Tor and Forge and my editor. I just can't imagine some of the experience some of these other writers have had, including with my cover. So one of the things that my editor at the time was Diana Gill, she sent me this list and said, I want you to tell me what your favorite colors are. What kind of art do you like? What do you absolutely hate? And so she already knew, I don't like bright colors. I don't want modern. And here, I like Gustav Klimt and I like, sepia color. So she already knew what I liked.
Mm.
And so she sent me a group of photographs, daguerreotypes from the early 20th century that we loved, and then sent it to the artist. And so this was the very first pass.
Oh, wow.
So like, oh, okay, I'm okay with this one.
Yeah, you just looked at it and you're like, "That's great." Yeah, I would be
Yep.
thrilled. This is just simply gorgeous, and it looks great on a shelf too, which is always good. And so that's the book. Look for it in your bookstores. And can you pitch it for us? Tell us about your
So
book.
it's the story of, and you did a good job on your intro.
Oh, thank you.
It's the story of three women spread over several centuries, starting from the just before the Haitian Revolution in 1791 and coming up until current times, all with magical abilities, but they all have kind of have a pivot point and a thread and a connection to one central character, which is Mother Abigail, and she is a voodoo priestess who has the ability to create a parallel universe that becomes a stop on the Underground Railroad.
And I just want to say, for those of you who are watching, the writing is spectacular, and
Thank you.
it really grips you from the first chapter. And about yourself, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I am an extroverted introvert. Given my druthers, I'd rather stay home and not talk to people. But if you drag me out and make me go places, then I kind of take over. I'm the, yeah, life of the party.
And what's your favorite step in writing, drafting, or revising?
Oh, revising. I love revising.
Are
Love
you
it.
are you a perfectionist or a chaos artist?
Chaos. Absolute chaos.
And do you have a huge ego, or are you humble and demure?
Ego.
As yeah, as someone who looks at the list, that makes sense.
Yeah, right.
I imagine I will have a huge ego about the lists too someday. So totally understandable. And are you a morning writer or an evening writer?
I try to get up every morning between 4:30 and 5 in the morning and try to get some writing done before I go to work. Yeah.
That's amazing. My hat's off to you. That takes a lot of willpower. And are you a plotter or a pantser?
Pantser.
And do you start with character first or plot first?
You know that I struggled with that question for a long time because I didn't know, but I think plot. I think plot, the idea of the what if somebody could do this and what if, and then the characters come secondarily.
Mhm. And what revision suggestion did you get along the way that was most helpful for your book?
Oh, so I don't know if it was most helpful, but I think it changed it the most. So there was no when the story was bought, there was no Gael character at all. So there was no modern character. And once the house bought the book, they really felt very strongly that they wanted a modern character to ground the book in the 21st century, which I dug my heels in and thought, you guys are killing me, man. Um, so I didn't know that that was going to be workable, and I didn't think it would work, but I ultimately fell in love with Gael. So I'd have to say, I don't know if most helpful, but certainly the most altering for the book.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. But I like the Gale character, so
I did
I think it
too.
worked great. Would you ever like to be famous?
Yes, absolutely. Like J.K. Rowling famous.
It sounds good. And if you were to wake up tomorrow having gained any one non-supernatural quality or ability, what would it be?
Oh, non-supernatural?
Not
Okay,
non-supernatural.
like so I could have a magic power?
Yeah, so it's not supernatural. So like photographic memory or the
Oh.
ability to be extremely patient, which is what one person said,
Mm.
or
I think probably I would like the combination of organizational skills and memory.
nice. And what are you working on now?
So I'm working on. So there's Forge has one a book that's at acquisitions now. So we're waiting to hear back from them, and that's about a girl who has the ability to manifest her dreams into reality. Um, and I'm working on a historical novel right now about a white girl who is being raised in Detroit in the 1930s and 40s in the Black Bottom by a family in the Black Bottom of Detroit.
Ooh, interesting. Thank you so much. And for everyone watching, I'm putting links below to where you can order Rita's books and follow her on social media. So definitely check her out and keep up with what she's doing next, because I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. And thank you so much, Rita, for being on the channel.
Thank you, Carly.